You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what do you say, hockey fans? Erica L. Ayala here, your host of Locked On Kraken and contributor to Locked On NHL for the Women's Hockey Spotlight that comes to you every other Friday. Now, on today's Women's Hockey Spotlight, we're going to talk about the PWHPA. They have a little bit of news as well as a showcase series happening in Tampa. We're going to talk about the Rivalry Series and who won the seven-game series between the United States and Canada. And of course, we'll talk about Captain Canada and a little bit of history that she made. And we will close out the Women's Hockey Spotlight talking about the Premier Hockey Federation and the games to watch for the weekend. Let's start with good friend Hailey Salvian. I've had her on Locked On Kraken before. Hailey Salvian for The Athletic broke that the PWHPA is organizing a formal union and they are negotiating with their investor group at the moment. This signals a closer step for the PWHPA to becoming a full-blown hockey league. Right now, they do a barnstorming group, and they're different from the PHF in that they have showcases. Again, we'll get into that in a little bit. But there's no set in stone timeline for when the PWHPA's new league will get going, but this is what Jana Hefford, PWHPA consultant, had to say. We want to see our vision of a professional league become a reality as soon as possible, but we're not willing to compromise on doing it right. So don't know what that means just yet, but it is great news for the athletes in particular that there will be a formal union. Now, the PHF has a players association, but they are not formally a union. The CWHL didn't have a union. The NWHL before it did not have a union. So this is a huge step, and we cannot wait to see more details. Now, speaking of the PWHPA, they do have a showcase, and that will be coming to Tampa Bay. Now, we've talked about this before, but it's going to be an exciting showcase, and you've got Team Scotiabank versus Team Harvey's. They will play today. That's at 12 p.m. Then you also have Team Sonnet versus Team Adidas at 3 p.m. today, February 24th. On the 25th, Adidas versus Scotiabank at 1 p.m. and Team Sonnet versus Team Harvey's at 4 p.m. And then finally on Sunday, Harvey's versus Scotiabank at 11 a.m. and Team Adidas versus Team Sonnet at 2 p.m. Those are all Eastern Standard Time, and you can watch on CBC Sports. So that's what's going on with the PWHPA. Let's switch gears and talk a little bit about the Rivalry Series. Now, we've talked about this before, but the Rivalry Series is essentially an exhibition tour between the United States and Canada. This year, 2022-23, it was a 7-game series. They played in Seattle, they played in Nevada, they were just in Quebec. So they've traveled between the two countries and into a few different markets. And while the United States had an early start, 3 games consecutive in the beginning, it was Team Canada that was able to complete the back end sweep. There were games Monday and Wednesday of this week, again, both in Quebec, and both were dominating performances by Team Canada. 5-1 on Monday, and then another 5 goals to none on Wednesday. Now, on Monday's game, Marie-Philip Poulin was able to get to 200 career points for Team Canada whilst wearing the maple leaf. She becomes only the 5th player in Team Canada history to do that, alongside Hayley Wickenheiser, Jana Hefford, who we just mentioned with the PWHPA, Carolyn Ouellette, who's a bench boss for the senior national team, and Danielle Goyette. And Renee Debian had another fantastic performance for Canada, she played Wednesday, and it is a dominating performance right before World Championships. Now, again, this is a friendly. There technically was a trophy, but we also have to keep in mind that the United States was without their captain, Kendall Coyne Schofield, suffered an injury and was not with the team. There are also a lot of young players, and so both teams, Troy Ryan is the head coach for Canada, and then you have John Robleski, for the United States. Both know that this is still an evaluation period. We're right at the beginning of a new cycle, or 4-year period, quad, as it's sometimes called. And so not necessarily anything to worry about. We did get to see Aaron Frankel in net for the United States on Monday. We've talked about that in women's hockey spotlight before. So it was good to see some young talent. Also very evident that the United States and Canada in some respects are still very raw. So line combinations, defensive pairings, who's going to be the go-to goalie, who's going to even make the roster come World Championships, all up for grabs. World Championships will be hosted by Canada in Brampton in early April. And so you're going to want to stay tuned right here on Women's Hockey Spotlight so we know who's making the roster. Probably know that in a little over a month's time, end of March. And we'll talk about it as we get ready for another Women's Worlds. Finally, in closing for this Women's Hockey Spotlight, let's take you to the Premier Hockey Federation. Now, last time I was on here, I told you I had a hunch about what the PHF was going to do for playoffs. They finally announced what is happening with playoffs. The top 4 teams will make the playoffs, and the semifinals will actually be a series. This is a return to a series. The PHF, formerly known as the National Women's Hockey League, did have a 3-game series in the semifinals, and in the finals, the Isabel Cup finals, plural, used to be a thing. This year, we're only going to have a one-and-done winner-take-all for the Isabel Cup final, but we will have series in the semifinals, and the Boston area and Toronto will be hosting. And right now, the only 2 teams that have clinched one of the 4 spots are the Boston Pride and the Toronto Six. Now, we don't exactly know if these will be the final standings. You can see here that the Boston Pride right now is in first place, and they are followed up by, of course, the Toronto Six, Minnesota Whitecaps holding that 3rd place spot, and then the Connecticut Whale right now in 4th. Regardless of if Toronto ends the regular season first or Boston ends the regular season at first, either one of those teams will host. They've earned the right to host and have home ice, and they will host in their home cities. So no, Toronto won't host at Boston as the top seed, in case that wasn't clear. But what we do know is it's still a fight for the last 2 spots. And right now in the driver's seat, holding on and in control of their own destiny, is the Minnesota Whitecaps. Now, they lost a weekend series last weekend to Buffalo. And if you notice, the Buffalo Beauts are at the bottom of the barrel. They've been having lots of what appears to be turmoil. 2 players were released from their contracts, mutually released from their contracts. It's been a little bit of a mess, but they did get the weekend sweep over Minnesota, playing spoiler to the Whitecaps, who are very close to clinching one of those 4 playoff spots. Then you have Connecticut. They will play the Metropolitan Riveters on Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern time, but they only have 1 game this weekend, whereas the Minnesota Whitecaps have 2 shots to get some points and clinch that 3rd place spot. So it's going to be exciting. I will be on the call on ESPN Plus or TSN Plus if you're in Canada for the Toronto-Minnesota series. So you're not going to want to miss that. I just had my 100th broadcast for the Premier Hockey Federation League overall. It took 7 seasons to get to 100 broadcasts, but here we are. And so I'm very excited to continue on throughout the regular season, and you'll probably hear and see me in the postseason as well. All right, that's going to do it, folks, for our women's hockey spotlight here on Locked On NHL. Again, you can follow me at elindsay08. That's ELINDSAY08 for all things Seattle Kraken and, of course, women's hockey. Let me send you back over to Gil and Rachel.